Stand up. Go on. Actually do it. Push down through your heels. Let your hips swing forward over your feet. And let your spine stack into the long S curve it has been holding since you were about a year old. You just did something almost nothing else on Earth does. Birds do it. Kangaroos do it, after a fashion. But among the several thousand species of mammal on Earth, almost nobody walks the way you just walked. Habitually. On two legs. As the default, the thing you do to cross a room without thinking about it. Every great ape alive today, every chimpanzee and gorilla and orangutan and bonobo moves through the world on four limbs. And here is the honest answer to why we do not. Nobody knows. That is not me being coy before a reveal. After 150 years of arguing, four serious explanations are on the table. And some researchers now think the question itself is shaped wrong. But something did just change. In January of this year, a team led by Scott Williams at New York University published a re-analysis of a single thigh bone from the desert of Chad in the journal Science Advances. The bone is about 7 million years old, and it pushed a 24-year argument in a direction almost nobody expected. So, one answer you were probably taught in school, which the fossils have quietly demolished. Four answers still standing, and one very old bill that you personally are still paying. Every time your lower back reminds you it exists. You know this one. Africa dried out. The forest thinned into patches. Our tree-dwelling ancestors came down and found themselves crossing open grassland between stands of trees. Walking upright let them cover that ground, see over the grass, and the line everyone remembers, if he had reseer, it freed their hands. Free hands meant carrying. Carrying meant tools. Tools meant brains. And the rest is us. It is a wonderful story. It explains the thing you wanted explained and throws in tools and intelligence for free. It is called the Savannah Hypothesis. And for most of the 20th century, it was the answer. The problem is the order of events. That thigh bone from Chad belongs to Sahelanthropus tchadensis, and it dates to roughly 7 million years ago. When a skull of the same species was announced in 2002, researchers argued from that skull that the animal carried its head like an upright walker. Then, in 2020, a different team examined a partial femur from the same deposits and concluded the opposite. Too ape-like, they said, for habitual walking. There, the argument sat. Then, this January, Williams and his colleagues went back to those bones and found two things. The first is a small bump, called the femoral tubercle. It anchors the iliofemoral ligament, one of the main stabilizers of the human hip, when you are balanced on one leg. Which, if you think about it, is what walking actually is. That tubercle has only ever been identified in hominins, our own upright lineage, us and our extinct relatives, and nobody else. The second is antetorsion, a pronounced internal twist along the shaft of the thigh bone, which brings the knee underneath the body's center of mass, so a step does not topple you sideways. Compared against living apes and against fossil apes from tens of millions of years earlier, the twist in this bone fell exclusively with the hominins. Their conclusion is carefully worded, and the wording matters. Sahelanthropus was capable of habitual but not obligate bipedalism. It walked upright often. It was not stuck with it. Hold that date, 7 million years ago, and it is not alone. In the Tugan Hills of central Kenya, Brigitte Senut and Martin Pickford found a chimpanzee-sized creature they named Auroran tuganensis. Millennium Man for when it turned up, about 6 million years old. Its upper femur shows the bone thickening a leg develops when it carries weight upright. Auroran climbed. It also in all likelihood walked. Then there is Artie. Ardipithecus ramidus from Aramis in Ethiopia, 4.4 million years old, described by Tim White's team in Science in 2009. Artie walked upright, and White's team argued emphatically that Artie lived in woodland, a river margin habitat, trees and shade, explicitly not open savanna. Line them up: 7 million, 6 million, 4.4 million. Upright, or partly upright, everyone, and living in wooded or mixed country while they did it. The landscape they were supposedly driven out onto, grassland as the dominant ecosystem, the thing you picture when you hear the word savanna, comes to define East Africa much later, around 3 to 2 million years ago, which is roughly when our own genus, Homo, appears. Millions of years after the walking started, the savanna did not push us upright. We were already upright when it arrived. Two honest caveats, because this is where the confident version of this video would overstate its case. First, there was grass. A 2023 study out of the University of California, Santa Cruz found hot climate grasses already locally abundant in eastern Africa more than 16 million years ago. What arrived late was grassland dominance, not grass. Second, the habitat reconstructions are themselves fought over. White's woodland claim for Artie was disputed within months by a team who went back to his own data and read open country in it. So the honest verdict is not the savanna hypothesis is disproven. It is more awkward than that. The story, as usually told, does not match the sequence of the fossils, and as usually stated, it is vague enough to be very hard to prove wrong at all, which is its own kind of failure. Before the contenders, though, we have to talk about the bill, because whatever Standing Up bought, it was not free, and the receipt is inside your body right now. In 1974, in the Afar region of Ethiopia, a team found about 40% of the skeleton of a young female Australopithecus afarensis who lived roughly 3.2 million years ago. They called her Lucy. She walked upright. Pelvis, knee, ankle, the whole apparatus is a walker's. In 2016, John Kappelman and colleagues published a study in Nature based on high-resolution three-dimensional scans and reported something striking. Lucy's upper arm bones are shattered, hinge fractures where one side of the bone snaps and the other stays intact, the way a living branch breaks. She also has a broken ankle, knee, pelvis, and at least one rib. Kappelman's reading is that she fell from a considerable height, most likely out of a tall tree, and threw her arms out at the moment of impact, the same pattern he noted that turns up in car crash victims. This is contested. Others argue the cracks formed long after death during fossilization. But if he is right, the most famous biped in the fossil record died because she was caught between two worlds. A body built to walk, still climbing trees, it was no longer quite built to climb. That is a cost we no longer pay. Here are two we still do. Sit with your lower back a moment. Ordinary back trouble has been blamed on upright walking since the 1920s. But the modern version from Kimberly Plomp and colleagues is much sharper than walking upright hurts your back. Plomp's team compared the vertebrae of people who had suffered disc herniation against those who had not, and then compared both against chimpanzees and fossil hominins. The vertebrae of the people who herniated were shaped more like a chimpanzee's. They call it the ancestral shape hypothesis. Human vertebral shape sits on a spectrum. At one end, exaggerated adaptations for upright walking. At the other, something closer to the ancestral ape form. The people at the ancestral end are the ones whose discs fail. Read that again, because it is strange and rather beautiful. Your back does not hurt because you walk upright. Your back hurts because some part of it never quite finished the transition. The second bill is childbirth. The classic explanation is the obstetrical dilemma. Human babies have enormous heads. Human mothers have a pelvis narrowed for efficient walking. Those requirements fight. And evolution's compromise was to eject the baby early, which is why human newborns are so helpless compared with a foal that stands within the hour. Neat and widely taught. In 2012, the anthropologist Holly Dunsworth challenged it in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. When she went looking for hard evidence that a wider pelvis actually makes walking worse, she could not find it. Her alternative says birth is triggered by the mother's metabolism rather than the birth canal. A growing fetus demands more energy until it exceeds what she can sustainably supply, and labor begins. And then, because this is how science works, that hypothesis got its own challenge. A later analysis pooling more than 300 women across 8 countries found that the metabolic ceiling varies enormously between people and does not reliably predict when labor actually starts. Contested in both directions. What is not in doubt is that human birth is unusually difficult, that human infants are unusually helpless, and that our upright pelvis is somewhere in that story. Add it up. A body that fell out of trees, a spine that half finished its transition, childbirth harder than for any of our relatives, and at top speed a chimpanzee beats without trying. That is an enormous price, which means whatever standing up bought had to be worth it. The first answer is the least romantic and possibly the strongest, and it came from putting chimpanzees on a treadmill. In 2007, Michael Sokol, David Reichlin, and Herman Ponzer published a study that did something wonderfully direct. They trained chimpanzees to walk on a treadmill, on 4 legs and on 2, wearing masks that measured oxygen consumption, which is a very good proxy for what the movement costs. Then they measured humans doing the same. Human walking costs about 75% less energy than chimpanzee walking. And here is the part people miss. 75% less either way. Whether the chimp went on 4 legs or 2, our walk was roughly 4 times cheaper. Not somewhat more efficient. 4 times cheaper on every step for your entire life. An animal that spends 4 times less energy getting around can exploit food that is patchy and far apart, because the walk between patches stops being a losing trade. Range is the whole game. An animal's range is the size of the world it can eat from. Cheap walking made our ancestors' world bigger, and kept making it bigger, right up to the point where their descendants walked out of Africa and into every habitable landmass on the planet. One honest wrinkle. Sokol's team measured modern humans with our fully evolved long-legged spring-tendoned anatomy. The first upright hominins did not have that body, and their walk was almost certainly less efficient. So efficiency may explain less about the first step onto 2 legs than about why, once it started, evolution kept pushing so hard in that direction, which leaves what got it started. For that, look at what the hands were doing. Chimpanzees stand up more often than you would guess. And when researchers recorded exactly when, a pattern fell out. Kevin Hunt spent years watching wild chimpanzees and published what he called the postural feeding hypothesis in 1996. 80% of the time a chimp adopted an upright posture, it was foraging. And 60% of the time it was hand-assisted, the animal holding an overhead branch for balance while it worked, reaching for small fruit in short, open canopy trees. That reframes the question. Hunt's argument is that bipedalism did not begin as a way of walking at all. It began as a way of standing still, a feeding posture, a way of getting your hands to fruit a quadruped cannot reach without climbing. The walking came afterwards. out of a body already spending much of its day upright. Then there is carrying. In 2012, Susana Carvalho, Dorabiro, Tetsuro Matsuzawa, and colleagues published a study in Current Biology on the chimpanzees of Bossou in Guinea. Across 14 months of watching these chimps raid nearby crops, 35% of their activity during raids involved moving bipedally because they were trying to carry as much as possible in one trip. Then the team ran an experiment. In a forest clearing, they put out two kinds of nut. One was the oil palm nut, familiar, locally available, nothing special. The other was the kula nut, which does not grow there and which the chimps love but rarely get. The behavior changed depending on which was on offer. When the prize was the rare one, they walked upright more often and carried more of it, hauling it off somewhere with less competition before anyone else could take it. So bipedal carrying is not just about hauling cargo. It is about hauling contested, valuable cargo, fast, away from your rivals, worth teetering along on your hind legs with your arms full. Now run that pressure not for 14 months, but for 100,000 generations. Somewhere the good food is patchy and everyone wants it. You can see how a posture becomes a habit, and a habit becomes an anatomy. The third answer is about heat. It is the one I find most seductive, which is exactly why I want to be careful with it. In 1991, the physiologist Peter Wheeler published calculations about a body's heat load in open equatorial country, and the core of it is geometry. Picture a four-legged animal in the tropics at midday. The sun is nearly straight overhead, and the animal's back, its largest surface, hyperthyroid, is turned directly up at it, soaking up radiation along its whole length. Now stand that animal up. The sun falls on a much smaller target, head and shoulders. The body has rotated out of the line of fire. It is an appealing package. It links upright posture to our other strange thermal traits, our near hairlessness, our extraordinary sweating, and suggests a body engineered as a cooling system, able to stay active through the midday heat while the predators of Africa lie in the shade. And I have to tell you that more recent modeling does not support it as the cause. Work revisiting Wheeler's models concluded that upright stance probably evolved for non-thermoregulatory reasons, that the cooling is real, but arrives as a benefit of a body that had already stood up rather than the pressure that stood it up. I am including it anyway because this is what the process actually looks like. A good idea, carefully argued that later work erodes. If you only ever hear the ideas that survived, you get a badly distorted picture of how this knowledge got made. Everything so far assumes a particular shape of event. There was a four-legged ape. Something happened. It became a two-legged ape. Find the something and you have solved it. In 2019, a fossil from Bavaria suggested that shape might be wrong. In a clay pit in southern Germany, a team led by Madeleine Böhme recovered an ape they named Danuvius guggenmosi. It is 11.62 million years old, older than any hominin, older than the split between us and chimpanzees, older than the question we have been asking. And they recovered complete limb bones, which is rare enough to be a small miracle. Those bones show a combination nobody had seen. Danuvius has a broad chest, a long lower back, and hips and knees built to extend, to straighten and bear weight in a vertical line the way bipeds do. And at the same time, the long, fully extendable forelimbs of an ape built for hanging. Böhme's team called the resulting movement extended limb clambering. Picture an animal walking along a branch on its hind legs, upright, long arms reaching up to grip the branches above for balance. Not swinging beneath the branch like a gibbon. Not knuckle walking along the top like a chimp. Walking along it, upright, holding on. If that reading is right, the implication is disorienting. The upright body plan, extended hip, straightened knee, weight stacked vertically, would not be a human invention at all. It would be part of the ancestral toolkit of the great apes, present in the trees millions of years before anyone came down out of them, which would mean our ancestors did not become upright. They stayed upright and came down to the ground, already carrying a body that could handle it. And knuckle walking, the thing chimps and gorillas do, which we have always treated as the primitive baseline we escaped, would be the newer, more specialized invention. Not the starting point. A departure from it. Is that right? Here's my favorite detail in this whole story. The most prominent published skeptic of the Danuvius interpretation is Scott Williams. The same Scott Williams who led the Sahelanthropus paper that opened this video. That is not a contradiction, and it is not a gotcha. It is what a functioning scientific argument looks like from the inside. The same researcher can find one set of bones convincing and another set thin, say so in print in both directions, and be right to do it. The slop version of this video picks whichever verdict makes the better story and never mentions the other. So where does that leave us? Nobody can tell you which contender is the reason. There may not be a single reason. The most defensible reading of the evidence is that bipedalism was not an event, but a long, messy, reversible drift in mixed woodland over millions of years, with a dozen small advantages nudging in roughly the same direction, which is precisely why it is so hard to point at one and say that one. That is why you can stand up. We want an origin story with a moment in it. The evidence keeps offering us a slope. Let me leave you somewhere firmer, because while we cannot say why it started, we can say with real precision what it turned into. In 1978, at a place called Laetoli in northern Tanzania, Mary Leakey's team uncovered a layer of volcanic ash that had fallen, been rained on, and then set like cement. Pressed into it were footprints. They are 3.66 million years old. The trail runs almost 27 meters and preserves around 70 prints, generally attributed to Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy's species. One researcher described them as very similar to the kind of footprints you or I would make walking along a beach. There is a heel strike. There is an arch. There is weight rolling forward along the outside of the foot and pushing off through the big toe. There is no knuckle print anywhere. Whoever left these was not experimenting with walking. They were walking the way you walked across the room a few minutes ago, 3.5 million years before anyone thought to wonder why. And they were not alone. Researchers later found a second set of tracks 150 meters south, pressed into the very same ash layer. Two groups of upright walkers crossing the same plane in the same brief geological moment. From there, the body kept refining. By the time Homo erectus appears around 1.9 million years ago, the legs are long, the walk is economical, the daily range enormous. In 2004, Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman argued in Nature that this body was built not just for walking, but for running long distances, that human endurance running capacity is unique among primates and matches or beats dedicated runners like dogs and horses. That is the animal that walked out of Africa. Not the strongest, not the quickest, not the best armed. The one that could keep going in the heat, long after the fast things had to stop. So we are left with an uncomfortable pair of facts. The most distinctive thing about your body, the thing that shaped your hips, your spine, your feet, your birth, and your back pain, has no agreed explanation. And it worked so well it carried your ancestors onto every continent on Earth. Stand up again if you sat down. That small, boring adjustment your body just made without consulting you is a 7 million-year-old solution to a problem we still cannot name.